My really warm greetings to all entire English-speaking auditory, which is going to hear and listen to this video review. My name is Vasil Pekno. I'm Ukrainian journalist, and I'm observing what is going on Ukrainian battlefield. So, right now, I'll tell you what is happening on this battlefield as of 29th of May. So, please don't forget to support this video with your likes, subscribe to us, and don't forget to comment on it. Let's start.
So, according to Spiegel, Volodymyr Zelensky allegedly left Germany rather urgently yesterday. He quickly returned from Kyiv to Germany. Why? Because of the threatening security situation in the Sumy region. The president was supposed to attend the ceremony, awarding Ursula von der Leyen the Charlemagne Prize, but due to the threat of a renewed Russian offensive in the Sumy region, he returned earlier than planned. It was precisely this headline that unsettled Ukrainians the previous evening. I must immediately point out that Ukrainian sources, Ukrainian outlets like RBC Ukraine, promptly refuted this information, stating that the reports about an offensive in the Sumy region do not correspond to reality. Now I will try to add my own perspective on this. I don't know the reasons there, whether the president went or not. What happened to him? Honestly, I don't know. But I will add my own understanding of what is happening in the Sumy region, because yesterday I spent more than an hour, let's say, talking with the soldiers who are currently holding our border in Sumy. So, after objectively talking with representatives of several units, I can, as they say, responsibly state what the situation is now, friends, in the Sumy region. Right now, first of all, yes, I'll say this. There have been, I saw messages, some rather alarmist messages claiming that supposedly the enemy that is now pressing on Yunakivka, well, in the direction of Yunakivka, because let me show Yunakivka more closely. So the enemy is still quite far from Yunakivka. Although, on the other hand, it's not that far either. The enemy could approach Yunakivka the enemy could come from the Bilovody area and from the Loknya area. Well, most likely from the Loknya area. What is Yunakivka? Yunakivka is, it's a center, it's a logistics hub. It's a place with rather significant elevations in the Sumy region. And essentially, well, according to many assessments from those guys I've talked to, this is the limit. This is the furthest advance that Russia can afford with the current set of troops they have in the Sumy region as of today. But as of today, there's no reason to even talk about the enemy approaching Yunakivka, because there's still at least one more village, Loknya, on the way, and the Russians only managed to reach it in terms of launching attacks, but they're nowhere near capturing it. I've already seen some alarming reports circulating in the Ukrainian sector, particularly on social media, claiming that from Yunakivka there would supposedly be a direct threat of enemy FPV drone strikes on Sumy. Now, let's do the math on the distances. So, here is Yunakivka and here is Sumy. Keep that in mind. Let's calculate the distances. Yunakivka to Sumy is 12.7 kilometers. What can I tell you, friends? In reality, 12.7 kilometers. Well, first of all, that's definitely a distance that enemy fiber optic drones can cover. They already reach about 20 to 25 kilometers. But first of all, you have to take into account the context that there is such a thing as radio horizons. And here, along this very straight section that I drew, this straight line, the area is quite densely forested. Moreover, in fact, if we look from the Sumy region in other directions, not from Sumy to Yunakivka, for example, but to other sections of the border, like to the same Kostiantynivka, you can see that those same 27 kilometers from the Russian state border to Sumy basically stretch out there as well. See, I'm not lying. Here you go. 27 here, 27, well, 27, about 28 here. 27 here, 27 here, 27 here, 27 here. I'm not lying. That's exactly how it is. So, on the eastern positions, let's say, of the state border in this area, where the Russian state border extends deepest into our Sumy region, the same distance is maintained as from Yunakivka, 27 kilometers. So there's no point in fueling this panic any further. It's really unnecessary. The Russians don't have a large enough strike group, a strike force that could threaten Sumy. Yes, there is a threat to Sumy in the form of Shaheds, which can strike Sumy very quickly, very quickly because their launch points are close to the Ukrainian border, which means there is much less time to react and shoot down these Shaheds. Sumy could also be threatened by ballistic missiles. Sumy could indeed be threatened by enemy FPV drones as well if they continue to advance. But in fact, even an advance toward Yunakivka does not fundamentally change the balance of forces, positions, or the overall situation developing here in the Sumy direction. But as of today, there are no concerns that the enemy could advance to Yunakivka. Well, there aren't any, I repeat, as of today. At the moment, conditions have been created there that prevent the enemy from advancing. What is actually much more concerning is that the Russians have, so to speak, opened up a section of the border in the area of Kostiantynivka. Why? Because from here, from Kostiantynivka, it's quite close to another hub like Yunakivka. This is Kotin, a district center in the Sumy region. And so this Kotin-Pisarivka agglomeration, which also lies along the highway between Sumy and Sudzha, is actually quite dangerous in terms of potential Russian advances. Why is it dangerous? Because here, firstly, the distance the Russians would need to advance is much shorter than, for example, from Yunakivka. Secondly, advancing to this area would actually cut off, or at least create the risk of cutting off, all our logistical routes and, in general, could lead to the operational encirclement of our forces positioned to the northeast of this location. In fact, the ongoing battles in these areas, which even on the deep state map are currently marked as this red enemy zone, are taking place right here. So in this context, when it comes to Kotin, you don't need to be a great geostrategist to simply read the map and understand that the enemy's attempts to attack in this direction pose quite serious threats for us. Moreover, unfortunately, ever since the Kursk and Sudzha operations, the Russians have been consistently and quite regularly reaching as far as Pisarivka with their fiber optic drones. These are currently the biggest problems developing in the Sumy direction. And I say this, recounting my conversation with the soldiers who are holding the front in this direction. So, for what reason Spiegel writes that the president left, specifically because of the danger in the Sumy region, I do not know. I don't know. Perhaps in time we will get some relevant explanations and comments from Volodymyr Zelensky himself. On another section of the front, the northern front in the Kharkiv region, right here in the area of Stroivka, by the way, right on the border, which is located, this is Kharkiv region. Here in recent days, the Russians have carried out a series of attacks, and there was even relevant video footage that appeared on social media showing how the Russians are attacking Stroivka, specifically its central part. But in this case, in the case of this village, Ukrainian forces repelled the enemy's attacks. Russian assault troops tried to immediately gain a foothold in the buildings in the central part of Stroivka, but this did not happen. We simply state the fact. The pressure in the north has intensified. To shout, to sound the alarm, to make noise about some kind of extreme danger and warning, I actually wouldn't do that in this situation, although we shouldn't downplay the risks and threats of the situation. I repeat myself systematically every day and will continue to say that, in my opinion, the situation that is developing for us in Donbas is much more dangerous, especially first and foremost in the Kostiantynivka and Pokrovsko-Kostiantynivka directions. I am outlining this salient of the enemy that has formed here. I refer to it using medical terminology as a sort of boil that has formed in the area of our defense on the Kostiantynivka direction. By the way, yesterday, in one of the military public forums, I read a very apt comparison describing what this boil resembles. It resembles the situation that actually developed a year ago in May of 2024. A similar boil was created in a settlement called Osheretine. It was there that the enemy made an advance of a similar nature. And what did the enemy's advance lead to after our troops withdrew from Avdiivka and Osheretine was taken? I think many of you can guess or already know. It was in fact a rapid collapse of many defensive positions in the Avdiivka-Pokrovsk direction. This was the fall of Selidov, and it was also the rather quick and rapid fall of Novohrodivka. And now, as the enemy has once again created this boil that can only be cut off by a flanking strike against the advancing enemy forces, there is a growing concern and danger that, just like back then near Okheretine, the enemy will have a certain window of opportunity where they could advance right up to Kostiantynivka itself and possibly even further to Sloviansk and Kramatorsk, just as they did after capturing Okheretine last year, exactly a year ago, when they advanced as a result all the way to Pokrovsk. Only now have they been heroically stopped near Pokrovsk. But the first issue in this cascade of problems was Okaretain. You can even rewind the map a bit. The deep state map functionality allows you to do this. Let's rewind the map to 2024, May 24th. And so, for example, let's move the map to the 1st of May. Let's see what it looked like then. On the 1st of May, you can see this small pimple, so to speak, in the Okaretain area. And it had already started to form back then. Now I'll turn on the display a sped up view of how this map progressed further. It might have seemed like the situation wasn't dangerous, but once the enemy had already taken Okaretain, that's when they began their very, very rapid expansion. Let's set the speed to 5 times and watch the changes on the map that took place in the Okaretain area. So, sorry, let me go back one more time. May of 2024. May, the first day. Here we go. Let's display the map. Look how quickly everything started moving from that boil at Okaretain. The Russians, as this military public page writes, basically got themselves, well, actually a window of operational opportunity, which they took advantage of very quickly and advanced dozens of kilometers to the west. Right now, God forbid, a similar situation could develop in the area of the Kostiantynivka front, where at Popiev Yar the enemy is advancing and also creating a wedge in our defenses. There are all the risks to believe that another operational window could open up. Well, as you can see, that's exactly how things unfolded. Hrodivka, Novohrodivka, and eventually even Vishnev, Ukrainsk, Hirnik, Kurakivka, and Selidove were lost. All of this unfolded in a kind of wild cascade, and it all started with the loss of the settlement of Okaretain. It's like, I would say a cursed axis starting from Donetsk. This cursed axis now runs through Okaretain in the same direction as the enemies advance. They keep hitting the same spot, basically. They find a weak point and keep pounding it, and pounding it. That's why, in my clear personal opinion, the greatest risks are not in the north, not in the south, but in Donbas. The configuration of battles on other fronts of Ukraine's defense against the Russian Federation will depend on Donbas, specifically on Donbas. It all depends on this direction, on how we are able to handle the challenge that has now arisen at the Kostiantynivka salient. Besides this, today I want to highlight one more area, so to speak, the Bohatyr region. You can actually observe how recently there have been rather significant advances by the enemy here. But what should be considered significant and what should be considered not very significant is all a very relative matter. The Russians wanted to capture Bohatyr even before, in fact, the 9th of May. Indeed, they had set such objectives, to clear it, to capture it by the 9th of May. Well, according to their logic, as they say, to liberate it. Accordingly, they did not manage to do this by the 9th of May. But we gave them a good beating there. Our units really wore them down by concentrating all our military capabilities, concentrating our firepower, using all available and existing so-called NATO tools when, through coordinated fire strikes on the enemy's channeled defense and channeled attack, all the forces and firepower available to us are directed accordingly as the situation demands. And we managed to successfully stop the enemy forces on the approaches to the settlement of Bohatyr. Now, near Bohatyr, as we can clearly see, the enemy has unfortunately made some advances. They are also concentrating their forces in Odryadne. So yes, the enemy has achieved a certain degree of success. At the same time, according to our 33rd Mechanized Brigade of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, they are constantly carrying out clearing operations of the appropriate kind here. The video I'm about to show you is footage of a clearing operation by the assault troops of the 33rd Brigade, who, in the southern part of the village of Bohatyr, are carrying out these counter-assault actions, throwing grenades at the remaining enemy forces and conducting small arms clearing operations against them. According to the 33rd Brigade, this is recent footage. If it really is recent, that means the southern part of the village of Bohatyr is currently under our control, even though on the deep state map we see these advances. But overall, the enemy has not abandoned the Novopavlivka direction. They continue to put pressure on this area. In this section of the front, the 33rd Mechanized Brigade has completed assault operations and is now clearing out this settlement. But in any case, the enemy's attention remains focused here. Moreover, this attention also takes the form of drone unit strikes from the Lokliv area, which are disrupting our logistics in this direction. It is actually difficult to continue holding the defense here, but our troops are still holding on. They are holding on so that they can continue to stand their ground and deliver powerful counterstrikes against the enemy. This is what is happening. What are these powerful counterstrikes? Take note, yesterday the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation, Sergei Lavrov, stated that Russia is supposedly ready to negotiate with Ukraine in a second round of peace talks, which they have proposed again for June 2nd. Where? In Istanbul. And what happened right before these statements? So put the pieces of the puzzle together, 2 plus 2. What happened before this? It happened after Ukrainian drones reached the Moscow region, and in fact did so quite powerfully. Yesterday, the Ukrainian General Staff confirmed that on the night before last, there was an attack on, among other targets, Russia's leading drone manufacturing enterprise. The enterprise is called Kronstadt, and it was opened only in 2022. It was positioned as the first serial manufacturer of combat unmanned aerial vehicles in Russia. Here is one example of a drone strike carried out by a drone. In fact, there wasn't just one video, there were different angles, and it wasn't the same strike. Muscovites recorded several different ones. By the way, I want to mention that people in Dubna, near Moscow, feel very relaxed. This is where it happened. Dubna near Moscow is something of a mecca for engineering and military enterprises of the Russian Federation. People there film these drone flyovers in a very relaxed way, as if they're enjoying it, thinking nothing has ever affected them. In fact, Moscow needs to be made even more uncomfortable for them. But let's get back to Kronstadt. It was opened in 2022. There they manufacture very modern Russian drones called Orion, as well as new models, including cruise missiles known as Banderol. In addition, near Kronstadt, there is another strategic facility called the Dubna Machine Building Plant and the Raduga Design Bureau, which, according to the Ukrainian General Staff, was also hit by Ukrainian long-range strike weapons. And what is, for example, the Raduga Design Bureau? The Raduga Design Bureau is responsible for cruise missiles KH-101, KH-59, KH-69, and KH-32. So once again, and by the way, take a look at this great video showing what Kronstadt looked like after the attack. In fact, impacts were recorded in more than one location. So once again, what am I getting at here? Lavrov only starts talking about memorandums in a second round of negotiations after the Russians got slapped in the Moscow region when strikes were carried out on their leading military-industrial enterprises. Or at the very least, even if these strikes weren't that painful, they realized that Ukraine can reach them. And this, it seems to me, is a very telling reality that the West needs to see, that Russia does not understand pleasant conversations, handshakes, or coddling. It understands only and exclusively strength. And I'll finish today with another nice touch. In fact, during this latest attack on Russian territory, it was announced that our new drone was used for this strike. The drone is called Gogol-M. What kind of drone is this? It's a sort of mother drone. You can now see the takeoff of the mother drone, a wing-type drone with a payload capacity of 9 kilograms. It carries 2 copters, 2 FPV kamikaze drones mounted on it, each with an 8-inch frame. And these 2 kamikaze drones can strike deep into enemy territory at quite, well, let's say significant distances. The main point of this type of weapon is that to hit targets at a certain number of kilometers, you don't need to use missiles that cost millions of dollars. Instead, you can actually replace them with a tool like this drone, or as it's called in Ukraine, the mother drone, which costs only about $10,000, including the 2 FPV drones it carries. So there's a big difference between $10,000 and $3 to $5 million for a similar type of strike, which would have been required, for example, by conventional means like missiles or other types of bombs. Accordingly, the war of attrition currently ongoing between Ukraine and Russia is primarily aimed at weakening each other's economies. Both sides are actually working to reduce the cost of their means of firepower, and it's necessary to withstand this race to make firepower cheaper. The Gogol-M, which was used as a strike drone in one of the recent attacks on the territory of the Russian Federation, is also an example of this. And with that, I will end here. Thank you, friends, for your attention. Take care of yourselves. All the best, and until we meet again.